Good afternoon, everybody. So hopefully everybody's awake. My talk is going to talk about diagnosis, histopathological alterations, molecular changes in melanoma, and how do you use the molecular changes for a classification of melanoma. Many of the molecular changes have already been alluded to, but we'll try to put them in context of the melanocytic proliferations. So we'll start with a brief outline of the history of melanoma, then talk about the salient histological features of how you make a diagnosis of a melanoma. We will then again go back to the molecular pathways that Dr. Celebi already alluded to, and then how do we use these molecular pathways to develop a molecular classification. And the previous two talks by Dr. Celebi and Dr. Phelps has already given you a broad outline of the histopathological, how does melanoma present and what are the molecular alterations. So, and a lot of this knowledge about the molecular alterations has been gained in the last 2 decades. Before that, actually clinicians felt despair because they didn't have much to offer. Even if you go like around 20 years back, if the patient had widespread disease, there was not much to offer to the patient. And this is amply exemplified by this quote that was given way back in 1840 by Samuel Cooper in the first lines of Theory and Practice of Surgery. And it says, "No remedy is known for the black cancer. The only chance of benefit depends upon early removal of disease by operation." And if we go to what is the present day consensus, it's almost the same actually, that melanoma is essentially curable when removed early, and when melanoma spreads, then the chance for cure drops dramatically. But with all the research that has been going on in the last 15 years, hopefully we are improving and we have better things to offer to the patient. Melanoma has been there for a long time. It's not like a recent disease. If you go back in literature, melanoma has been described in mummies of pre-Columbian Incas of Peru. So this is like 4th century BC. So 2,400 years back, basically. So melanoma has been there for a long time, although we have not been able to provide good treatment modalities for the patient. John Hunter, who was a surgeon at St. George Medical College in London, he is actually attributed to as the first surgeon who actually excised a melanoma case actually. And this was a mass in the mandible of a 35-year-old, which he excised. And this mass, which you can see at the right bottom of the slide, is actually still present in the Hunterian Museum in London. And at that time, they didn't even know that this was a melanoma, because melanoma was not described as a specific disease and entity at that time. And this was actually diagnosed as a melanoma in 1968, so 200 years later, when somebody took a biopsy from this lesion and actually looked at the biopsy. If we come to the term melanoma was actually coined 50 years later in 1838 by Dr. Sir Robert Carswell. And this illustration that you see is an illustration from his book, where you can see the brain with two big metastatic nodules. When you come to the treatment of melanoma, initial main contributors, one of them was William Norris. He was a general practitioner practicing in London, and he has written extensively about melanomas. He did a lot of studies on melanomas, and he has written extensively about melanomas. And after seeing that melanomas come back very frequently, he was the first one to suggest that a wide local excision should be done for melanomas. And this wide local excision then when the excisions became so wide that in 1907 it was the recommendation was you should excise 2 inches down to the fascia with a radical lymph node dissection. And this was the standard of care for quite some time. And Dr. Phelps, who has been practicing for 30 years, like he often reminds us that when he started his practice, he used to see big excisions of melanoma. So big excisions of melanoma were being done till very frequently actually. And if you look at other major contributors to the development of the understanding of melanoma, the one of the other big name comes is William Clark. We all talk about Clark level in melanoma. And it was William Clark who actually outlined the different types of melanoma, and that showed us the heterogeneity of the melanoma, that it is not one disease entity. And he also proposed a standard scale to assess the prognosis of melanoma, which is based upon histological examination. So you always hear about Clark level 1, Clark level 2, and that all tells you about the prognosis of melanoma. And this was then further refined by Breslow, who actually went ahead and gave a very specific measurements. And he showed that prognosis depend upon the depth of the melanoma. And so all this pioneering work that these people did with Dr. Clark, Dr. Breslow, and the work that they did actually provided a basis for the classification and prognosis of melanocytic lesions. And this is the classification that we currently follow in the WHO. So the WHO classification that we follow is actually based upon the classification that was provided by Clark almost 40 years ago. And according to his classification, melanoma was traditionally divided into 4 different categories, which included the superficial spreading, the lentigo maligna, the nodular melanoma, and the acral lentiginous melanoma. But we know we have been following this classification for the last 40 years, but we know there are quite a bit of limitations to this classification. So one is we see a lot of melanocytic proliferations that do not fit into this classification. And the most important thing is this classification does not provide any information about the prognosis of the lesion. So for example, if we say a patient has a superficial spreading melanoma, it doesn't tell us that the patient will be alive in 2 years or the patient will not be alive in 20 years. So the patient could have a superficial spreading, but we cannot give him any prognostic information based on this classification. So what we need is a classification that will provide good prognostication. And the most important thing for everybody who's treating melanomas, who's looking at melanomas, is they want a framework to develop therapeutic regimens for the patient. We want to give specific treatment for the patients. And for that, we need a good classification. So how do we build such a classification? So this classification can be built upon what are the histological features of the melanoma, and then as Dr. Celebi alluded to, what are the molecular alterations in the melanoma. So when we look at the histological features of melanoma, Dr. Self already described all the different types of melanoma. So there's no point in going into all of those details once again basically. So what we'll do, we'll just talk about the very salient features that the resident should know when they want to diagnose a melanoma. So what are the most important features? So when you look at the epidermis, you want to look at the pagetoid spread within the epidermis and the lack of circumscription of the melanocytic proliferation. And when you look at the dermis, the most important feature that you're looking for is the lack of maturation in the dermal component. So when you look at the melanocytes at the top and the bottom, they all look the same. The presence of pleomorphism, atypia, and the presence of mitosis. And when you're looking at a slide, the other important information that you want to glean from the slide is the prognostic features. What are the prognostic features that you can get from the biopsy of a melanoma? So one we already alluded to is the Breslow thickness. So according to the WHO, the Breslow thickness and the presence of mitosis are the two most important, and the presence of ulceration are the two most important prognostic features that you can get from melanoma. So Breslow thickness, the presence of ulceration, and then what are the other prognostic features that we want to look for is the presence of regression, then the presence of lymphovascular invasion. So once you look at a slide, you look at all the histological features, you look at all the prognostic features, and all that then will come in the current standard report that you get from Mount Sinai dermatopathology, or you should get from any dermatopathologist. And what are the features that should be included in your report? The Clark level, the Breslow thickness, the presence or absence of ulceration, the mitosis per square millimeter, the presence or absence of regression, and then lymphovascular invasion, perineural invasion, what is the kind of lymphocytic response, is there any microscopic satellitosis, is there any associated nevus, and the margins. And you need all this information because that will help you develop stage the melanoma, develop a staging for the melanoma. Because staging, for staging of the melanoma according to the AJCC criteria, you need the thickness of the melanoma, and then you need the presence or absence of ulceration, the presence or absence of mitosis, and then the lymph node status. So once you have all these from your report, then you can actually go ahead and stage the melanoma. But we know that staging of a melanoma just based on the histological features is not giving you enough information to treat the patient well. So we need more information. And what the molecular tests that are being done are now actually providing that information that can help you develop a better classification for the melanoma. And like we already alluded to, the last decade has seen a lot of activity, and all this molecular understanding of the lesions is helping us understand the biology of a melanoma in a much better way actually. So not only so it is not only important to understand the biology of melanoma, but most importantly, what is the goal of everybody? The goal is to hopefully all this knowledge that we are gaining will translate into better diagnosis and management. So like if we step back, Dr. Celebi already alluded to what I'm going to show you right now, but then we'll try to put it in context of the cells, all the different pathways actually. So for a melanocyte to become a melanoma, it has to go through certain molecular alterations. So if you look at the bigger picture, what are the molecular alterations that will cause development of a melanoma? So there has to be some sort of a gain of function mutation or some sort of chromosomal alterations, which will then lead to development of a nevus. In the cell, when the nevus is developing, most of the times the tumor suppressive mechanisms will then not allow the nevus to progress further, or it may actually cause the nevus to go into senescence actually. But when these tumor suppressive mechanisms are overridden, what happens then? You start developing more atypical lesions and you can develop a melanoma. But you have to, like the one thing that we need to stress is not all melanomas go through this pathway. So it is not melanocyte nevus melanoma. Only 20 to 25% of melanomas have an associated nevus. So there are a lot of other mechanisms that will then cause the melanocyte to convert directly into a melanoma actually. And all these different pathways that can lead to this process have been studied extensively in the last 2 decades, which is now shown in the simple diagram. So you can, in the simple diagram, you can see all the different pathways that have been studied in melanoma. And like given the shortage of time, we cannot go through all these pathways. So we'll just concentrate on the two most important pathways. So the two most important pathways in melanoma are the CDKN2A pathway and the MAP kinase pathway. So the first pathway, the CDKN2A pathway, is a tumor suppressive pathway. And before we go into and try to put in context where is this pathway altered in melanoma, we'll try to understand what this pathway does. So the main function of this pathway is actually to suppress the cellular proliferation. And for a cellular proliferation to occur, the cell has to go from the G1 to the S phase actually. So when the cell moves from the G1 to S phase in the cell cycle, it will proliferate actually. And this needs upregulation of the target genes, which is normally controlled by the transcription factor E2F1 actually. So the E2F1 will not let the cell to go from G1 to S phase because it is inhibited by the retinoblastoma protein. Now the retinoblastoma protein will inhibit E2F1 as long as it is not phosphorylated. So once this retinoblastoma protein is phosphorylated, it will then cause the E2F1 cell to actually move E2F1 to let the cell to upregulate the target genes, which will then cause the cell to go from G1 to S phase actually. The phosphorylation of the retinoblastoma protein is actually done by cyclin D1 when it gets associated with the cyclin dependent kinase 4,6. But by the cyclin E1 when it gets associated with the cyclin dependent kinase K2 actually, CDK2. Now in a normal cell, this doesn't happen because it is inhibited by P16, and we know P16 is an important molecule in melanocytic proliferation actually. And P16 is encoded by the CDKN2A gene. Now the P16 is a tumor suppressor protein that will inhibit this pathway to proliferate. CDKN2A not only encodes for P16, it also encodes for P14 actually. And what is the function of P14? It will inhibit MDM2 actually. And the MDM2, what is the function of MDM2? It will cause destruction of P53 by causing ubiquitation. So if the P53 is destroyed because the P14 is not functioning, then the cell will not go into apoptosis. So this pathway needs a functioning P14 for the cell to go into apoptosis and a functional P16 for the cell to not proliferate actually. So these pathways will not call the cell, is a tumor suppressor pathway that does not allow the cell to go from G1 to S phase, and whatever cells are present, it will let the cell to go into apoptosis. When we come to these two pathways are also connected because P53 can then stimulate P21, which is another tumor suppressor protein that can inhibit this pathway actually. So this acts as similar to P16 by not allowing the retinoblastoma protein to be phosphorylated. When we come to the MAP kinase pathway, which is more of a proliferative pathway. So MAP kinase pathway needs stimulation from the receptors that are present on the cell membrane. So once these receptors are stimulated, they can then cause a cascade of different molecules within the cytoplasm to be upregulated. The first molecule is the RAS family. And the RAS family is three isoforms, the NRAS, the KRAS, and the HRAS. The NRAS is very important in the melanocytic proliferation, which Dr. Celebi already alluded to. So once NRAS is upregulated, then it will cause the cascade to move to BRAF. The BRAF can then stimulate MEK. The MEK can then stimulate ERK. And once this pathway is upregulated, it will cause upregulation of the transcription factors, which will then cause the cell to proliferate. This pathway is also very important because it also controls another pathway which is very important in melanomas, which is the PI3K pathway. And what is the function of the PI3K pathway? It will first cause phosphorylation of PIP2 to PIP3 actually. And once PIP3 is phosphorylated, it can cause stimulation of AKT. And AKT is a very important molecule in melanocytic proliferation. What is the function of AKT? Once it is upregulated, it can cause stimulation of multiple different proteins in the cell. One is BAD, which is actually an anti-apoptotic molecule. So if BAD is upregulated, then apoptosis is not going to occur. The other molecule is mTOR. If the mTOR is upregulated, the cell will cause increased survival of the cell. And the last molecule is GSK3 beta, which will cause increased proliferation of the cell. So if these pathways are stimulated or because of some sort of mutation, there's going to be increased proliferation of the cell, and the cell is not going to go into apoptosis actually. In a normal cell, these pathways are inhibited by, so the PI3K pathway is inhibited by P10, which will stop the PIP3 from getting phosphorylated. And the other molecule that has come up recently is the neurofibromin 1, which is a tumor suppressor protein for the NRAS pathway. Now, why are we talking about all these molecules? Because we already heard from Dr. Celebi that all these molecules are very important and key components that can be mutated in melanocytic proliferations. Now, if we try to put them in context of these pathways and we look at the nevi, we know that the NRAS mutations have been described in a lot of congenital nevi actually. And the BRAF mutations have been described in a lot of melanocytic nevi. When we come to the Spitz nevi, which we know cause a lot of heartache to everybody, not only to the dermatopathologist, but to the treating clinician, everybody. There are multiple studies have been done in Spitz nevi. So the HRAS has been already, which we already alluded to, has been shown to be mutated in 20% of Spitz nevi. Dr. Phelps talked about the atypical Spitz nevus. So the atypical Spitz nevus has been shown to have a specific kind of mutation, which includes the BRAF mutation, but along with loss of BAP1. And these tumors have been now referred to as BAPomas actually. So the atypical Spitz tumor that show loss of mutation of BRAF and the loss of BAP1 are termed as BAPomas. So that is a very specific category of the Spitz nevi. And then we already heard about the blue nevi that have the GNAC and the GNA11 mutations. And why is this important? Because the GNAC and the GNA11, again, they feed into the MAP kinase pathway because they can upregulate phospholipase 3 and phosphokinase 3. When we look into what are the mutations in melanoma, if you look at the CDKN2A pathway, which is shown to be often inactivated in the familial melanomas. And this could be deletion, mutation, or some sort of hypermethylation. And we know once the CDKN2 is mutated, it will cause decreased functionality of the P16. And the cyclin D1 has been also shown to be amplified in a lot of the acral melanomas. If you look at the MAP kinase pathway, the NRAS, which we already heard about, is mutated in 15 to 30% of melanoma cases. And this was actually the first mutation described in melanoma, way back in 1984. If we talk for the BRAF, it is mutated in 50 to 60% of melanomas, and especially in the ones that are on the back or the extremities. And the c-KIT, which can act on this pathway to upregulate this pathway, is mutated in almost a large number of the acral melanomas. The NF1, which is a tumor suppressor protein for the MAP kinase pathway, any loss of function mutation of the NF1 can cause hyperactivation of this pathway. And in recent studies, NF1 has now become the third most common mutation in melanomas, especially the ones in sun-exposed areas. And the other interesting fact about NF1, it is like the mutation has been described in desmoplastic melanomas, and all the other mutations that we talked about have not been described in desmoplastic melanoma. So this is the only one that has actually been described in desmoplastic melanomas. If we come to the PI3K pathway, the AKT has been shown to be overexpressed in almost 70% of melanomas. And the PTEN loss has been shown in all to 20% of late stage melanomas. So all these different molecules that people are coming up, that this is mutated, this is mutated, this is mutated, or this is amplified, how is it helping us basically? So all this information is now telling us what is the underlying biology of the melanocytic proliferation. And researchers then soon realized that if you look at the specific mutation, then you can characterize what kind of melanoma. So if it is on the acral site, most likely the c-KIT mutation is going to be there. If it is on the sun-exposed site, you can have a cyclin D1 mutation. And when they started to classify these melanomas based on these molecular changes, they were able to explain the biology better, and they were also able to subtype the melanomas in a better way. So for example, in this study by Curtin, he divided the melanomas into 4 categories. So one was non-chronic sun-exposed, chronic sun-exposed, the acral melanomas, and the mucosal melanomas. And he was able to show that the non-chronic sun-exposed, the major mutation is the BRAF mutation. And the acral melanomas and the mucosal melanomas, the major mutation is the c-KIT mutation. In a recent paper by 2014, Dr. Bastian, who has been a pioneer in all these looking for mutations, he has been doing this work for the last 20 years. He was actually able to separate the melanomas into several categories based on the molecular alterations that were present in the melanomas. And then Dr. Celebi already alluded to this study, and this was done by our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Chen. They also tried to separate the melanomas out based on the molecular changes. And what they did was they took 333 melanoma samples, and they looked at all the different mutations. And they were able to actually divide the melanomas into 4 different categories. So the most common was the BRAF mutation, the second one was the RAS mutation, the third one was the NF1 mutation, and then the fourth one, they categorized them as triple wild type subtype actually. And all these different researchers that are helping us understand the biology of melanoma better are all over the world, but we have to also emphasize that all this research is being done at Mount Sinai also. So for example, Dr. Celebi, who is a very big name in melanoma research, actually has contributed a good understanding, has also contributed to understanding the molecular changes in melanoma. So for example, she showed that FBXW7 mutations in melanoma can be associated with some sort of therapy to the patient. Another big researcher in our institution is Dr. Bernstein, who is actually looking at a lot of the histones in melanoma and the chromatin pattern in melanoma. So researchers from Mount Sinai and all over the world are actually contributing a lot to our understanding of the melanoma. But we have to still, and this information, although it is far from perfect, because this is just like scratching the tip of the iceberg, it's just the beginning of a revolution. So more and more classifications are going to come up. But these classifications are very useful because now you can actually develop and select specific therapeutics regimens for the patient. So for example, if the patient has a BRAF mutation, then you can give them BRAF inhibitors. If the patient has an AKT mutation, then you can give them KIT inhibitors. So these classifications are actually helping us develop good therapy for the patient. But you have to remember, like I said, that this is just the beginning, and there are ways to go before we can actually have therapies that are potentially curative rather than just with palliative intent. And there are going to be multiple failures, which is evidenced by the lack of response that we see. So we know that patients of sorafenib can actually respond very well, but they can then they will actually fail again, and they'll get the melanoma is going to come back in a big way actually. So these therapies can fail, but this guy is Thomas Edison, he was the inventor of the incandescent bulb, and he had actually tried 2000 times before he could actually develop the bulb. And when he was asked, why did you fail, his answer was, I did not fail. I found out 2000 ways not to make a light bulb actually. So you only need one way to make it work actually. So now researchers also after multiple trials and errors are now coming to the conclusion that identification of patient subsets that we are trying to do with all this molecular testing, that is the best way to find a key to success in controlling this dreadful disease actually.